Welcome to The Critique, where today we are examining a piece arguing that the cultural embrace of victimhood across the political spectrum is systematically destroying personal agency.
Yeah, it's a really intense piece.
It is, and we're just going to dive straight into the feedback here. The abrupt escalation from contemporary political grievances to historical mass atrocities risks coming across as hyperbolic and alienating the reader.
Right, yeah. The pacing is, well, it's definitely something we need to talk about.
Exactly. I mean, the material starts off by highlighting modern politics, right? Like how the left pushes this idea of systemic oppression, and then the populist right pushes a narrative of stolen greatness.
Yeah, it specifically names Tucker Carlson's rebuke of Ben Shapiro.
Right. The debate about whether people should have to move for job, which is, a very relatable modern grievance about affordable housing.
Definitely. But then, let's look closely at the section discussing René Girard's scapegoat mechanism.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Because the text moves so rapidly from this cable news dispute straight into the horrors of Hitler's Germany, Stalin's Soviet Union, and, Pol Pot murdering people for wearing glasses.
Yeah, it gives you absolute whiplash.
It really does. I mean, the historical data is accurate, right? That is clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered the sheer velocity of this escalation.
The missing middle ground, basically?
Exactly. The weakness here is that the pacing jumps instantly from relatively modern, relatable disputes, like, feeling stuck in your hometown, straight to the extreme terminal logic of mass graves.
Right, jumping straight to the guillotine.
Yeah, and this missing middle ground makes the argument feel overly extreme. A skeptical reader might just defensively dismiss the core warning about victimhood rhetoric because it feels hysterical.
Yeah, if I'm just frustrated about the two-income trap and you tell me I'm on a direct path to the Khmer Rouge, I'm going to check out. I'm going to say, well, I'm not advocating for violence, so whatever.
Precisely. So the suggestion here is to modulate the pacing of this argument by illustrating the intermediate steps of societal degradation.
You need a smoother gradient.
You do. You have to show how modern rhetoric leads to ultimate historical horrors step by step. You don't want to lose those historical examples, but, build a bridge to them.
Right. So for concrete examples, before jumping to Stalin and Hitler, the writer could insert a paragraph showing how victimhood first leads to the breakdown of local community trust.
Yeah, shows Girard's scapegoat mechanism happening on a micro level.
Like at a city council meeting, maybe?
Exactly. Show the breakdown of civil discourse in a local setting, or the alienation of neighbors over a zoning dispute.
Or ruined Thanksgiving dinners.
Yes. You have to establish localized civil unrest and institutional paralysis first, before showing its terminal state-sponsored conclusion.
Okay, so that covers the pacing of the problem, but we also need to talk about how the text frames its solution, because the sudden pivot from universally applicable psychological data to highly specific religious directives narrows the piece's appeal and risks losing readers who were engaged by the initial secular arguments.
Yeah, this was a really jarring shift.
It was, right? I mean, the first half relies so heavily on universal secular data. You've got Martin Seligman's learned helplessness.
The dogs in the cages, right.
Exactly. The dogs who just take the electric shocks because they've learned they can't escape. It perfectly illustrates how victimhood rewires the brain.
Yeah, and then they pair that with Viktor Frankl's psychological observations in concentration camps.
Right, holding on to the last of the human freedoms.
And Raj Chetty's economic mobility data, too. As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that all these data points prove personal agency is vital.
It builds this massive, broad coalition of readers. You've got centrists, conservatives, secularists. Everyone is nodding along.
Right, because the evidence is airtight.
Ariel pivots to assert these highly specific theological mandates.
Yeah, out of nowhere we are referencing Genesis, Adam and Eve.
Right, and the assertion that the family exists primarily to support a man in his God-given mission to work the earth, and that the six-day work week is a divine command.
Which, makes sense for a specific audience, that makes sense, but could the evidence also support a different conclusion for readers who do not share this specific worldview?
Exactly. Is the material intentionally filtering its audience down to just Christian readers? Because it's going to lose the broader coalition it just built.
Yeah. The weakness is that this sudden shift feels exclusionary. A secular or politically centrist reader who loved the stuff about Raj Chetty is going to feel alienated. It morphs from a philosophical argument into theological doctrine. doctrine.
It feels like a bait and switch.
It really does. So the suggestion to fix this is to bridge this gap by framing the theological and traditional references as powerful historical frameworks and archetypal examples of agency, rather than presenting them as absolute universal mandates.
Oh, I like that. So we don't delete the religion?
No, you keep it. But for a concrete example, instead of declaring God said we will work 6 days as this abrupt fact, you introduce it contextually.
Right, so you'd say something like, for millennia, the Judeo-Christian tradition has used frameworks like the 6-day work week to structure human purpose.
Exactly, to ward off despair. Yeah. And when discussing Adam and Eve, explicitly acknowledge the shift. Frame it as the foundational mythos of Western civilization.
Right. Show how it perfectly encapsulates the psychology of taking responsibility. That keeps the philosophical weight without isolating anyone.
Yeah, it's very much what Jordan Peterson does, right?
Oh, totally. Treating the text with respect, but as a psychological pillar.
Exactly. Okay, so finally, we need to look at how these proposed solutions are actually structured at the very end of the piece.
Oh, yes, the conclusion. Structuring the conclusion as a rapid-fire list of lifestyle tips dilutes the profound philosophical thesis established in the earlier section.
Yeah, because the material wraps up with these actionable directives.
Right. It's like, clean your room, make your bed, which is a Peterson reference, get married to capture the marriage premium, go to church, and work hard.
Okay, so what I really like about this part is the intensely practical nature of the advice. It's highly actionable.
It is. It's a great life raft for the reader.
But building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of narrative momentum and structural cohesion?
Right, because right now, they are just stacked at the very end.
Exactly. The weakness is that by listing clean your room and go to church sequentially at the very end, the conclusion reads like a disconnected self-help checklist.
It's like an appendix that accidentally got stapled onto a geopolitical manifesto.
Yeah, it loses the incredible narrative momentum built by the deep dive into systemic oppression and the scapegoat mechanism. The solutions feel structurally divorced from the high-stakes problems they're meant to solve.
I mean, you spend 20 pages talking about the collapse of civilization, and then the finale is, don't forget to make your bed?
Right, it just doesn't match the stakes. So the suggestion is to weave these actionable micro-level solutions directly into the macro-level problems discussed earlier in the text.
Oh, so treat them as structural defenses right when the threat is introduced.
Exactly. Treat them as explicit structural defenses against the political forces being critiqued. So, for a concrete example, let's look at the go-to-church point, which uses Robert Putnam's social capital data.
The bowling alone stuff?
Yeah. When the text is discussing the alienation and isolation that demagogues exploit to create scapegoats.
The Girard section.
Right. Immediately introduce Putnam's data on church attendance and community groups right there. Frame community involvement as the direct antidote to political radicalization.
Wow, yeah. That elevates going to church from just a nice Sunday activity to like an immunological defense for the Republic.
Exactly. And you do the same thing with the clean your room concept. Tie that directly into the section on learned helplessness and Viktor Frankl.
Oh, I see. So when you're talking about the dogs giving up and Frankl's prisoners claiming their attitude, you introduce making the bed right then.
Yes. Show that making a bed is the physical manifestation of claiming the last of the human freedoms that Frankl wrote about.
It's an act of profound philosophical rebellion against tyranny in your own bedroom.
Exactly, rather than just leaving it as an isolated tip at the very end of the piece.
That makes so much sense. Well, this has been a really fantastic look at a very compelling premise. To quickly summarize, the material features an incredible argument about the dangers of victimhood, but it can be elevated significantly. First, by pacing the escalation from modern politics to historical atrocities.
Yeah, building that smoother gradient.
Right. Second, by broadening the framing of the theological points to maintain the diverse audience. And finally, by integrating the highly actionable practical advice throughout the core narrative rather than just listing it all at the end.
Yeah, weaving those solutions right into the problems will make the whole piece structurally bulletproof.
Absolutely. We really encourage you to implement these structural and thematic adjustments, and please submit your revised work back to us for further review. Thanks for listening.